Great, and we're live. So welcome everybody to this remote interview. My name is Lisette and I'm interviewing people and companies doing great things remotely. And today on the line, all the way from London, I've got Rebecca Seal. Rebecca, you are an award-winning food, drink, lifestyle, and personal development writer and podcaster of the podcast called The Solo Collective. We're going to get into all of that. But first, let's start with, what does your virtual office look like? What do you need to get your work done?
I need a really big window, basically. It's one of the things that is really crucial for me. So my desk, as a writer, I'm mostly desk-based, and my desk is a big wooden surface. So I like to have natural textures around me. I'm a big follower of biophilic design, which is the idea of bringing the natural world into your kind of home or work environment. So my desk has got lots of plants on it. It's by a big window so that my circadian rhythms aren't mangled by electric lighting and bright lights when it's dark and dim lights when it's bright outside. And I have a desk mate, which I'm very grateful for, because although I have worked from home for 12 years, I actually now rent a little room just down the road from my house. And the most important thing about that room is it's not where my children are.
That is important, especially right now. But what do you mean a desk mate?
So we have a really, really long desk. So we're actually very physically far apart, but she is on the other desk, at the other end of the desk. And it's the first time that I've had a kind of colleague for 12 years. Like, I've had a lot of colleagues, but not one that I sort of make a cup of tea for every now and then. We're not actually in the office at the same time very much, particularly at the moment, but there's just something quite lovely about having a tiny community of two to operate within, from a work point of view, which is quite new to me.
So why did you decide to get a separate office and a desk mate?
Well, I had a strange experience during the first lockdown in the UK, which was when I was finishing writing my book Solo. In that my husband's photography business, which is also at the end of our road, we've got an industrial estate at the end of the road, was obviously shut down and completely empty. And he and my two delightful but very small children, very small, very loud children, were in the house all the time. And so as soon as it was allowed, I started using the photography studio as a space to write in because it was quiet. And in so doing, I discovered a community of people who were all kind of checking in on their businesses around the photography studio and kind of pottering and generally sort of around and about, who I would have these really long distance conversations with, very brief long distance conversations with, from the steps outside the studio where I'd be having a cup of tea or, having a sandwich. And I realized how important and powerful they were, and how much they were making me feel better, and how much more work I was getting done after having these conversations. And so I realized that on the one hand, I was benefiting hugely from having some distance between my home and my work, but also I was benefiting from these sort of shallow social interactions that were kind of underpinning my daily life. And although I absolutely believe that it's fully possible to work from home and be completely productive, and I've done it for 12 years, and I had a lovely room in my house that was my home office, and it had a big window, and it was really, really great. It was all mine, very territorial about it. So I was extremely lucky. This experience of being near home is quite profound, and I think will be something that we will see happening a lot in the next few years as people's hybrid working patterns evolve. I think working near home will become a very popular option for people whose businesses don't require them to be in the office 100% of the time, because it's a very different thing to working in your home, especially if your home isn't a home which is designed for work, right? Most of us, and I for a long time had this experience, most of us don't have space in our house to work. I worked at the kitchen table for 2 years. I know how rubbish that is. And so I think there are a lot of people who are like, I don't like working from home, but they don't realize that actually, if you've got the space to do it, a little bit of territory, which is for you, it's a totally different experience. So I think things will change.
I have the luxury of having my own home office. The entire attic is for me, and and I don't have children, so that also makes a huge difference. So it's just a matter of, but yeah, it is lovely. But even before the pandemic, I also like to go out and go to different places just to mix it up a bit. I mean, I think for anybody, mixing up your workspace is good for your brain and for ideas and
Yeah.
just being able to go places. So how far away is your close workspace? Is it
Well,
walking
I
distance?
literally can see the end of the building from I'm currently in my bedroom because that's the best place to record podcasts in my house because it's nice and full of soft furnishings. But yeah, looking out of the window, I can look. It's maybe 6 gardens down
Oh,
from where
wow.
we live. So yeah, it's incredibly convenient. I feel incredibly lucky. It's also I hope my landlord doesn't hear this. It's also quite cheap. I don't want people to think that I'm sort of luxuriously spending tons of money. It's really not a lot of money per week to have this extra space, which again I think is something that people might not realize and will sort of influence how people work in the next couple of years.
Oh, yeah. I can only imagine that co-working spaces and cafes and all
Mm.
kinds of spaces are really going to start popping up once, even more. I mean, they were popping up a lot before, but I think even more is going to be happening when the pandemic is over.
Yeah, and I think they're going to be micro co-working spaces. That's what I'm in, is a set of 9 studios. And I think there'll be a lot more of that happening. So people will want what I've got, which is a closable front door, and kind of sole access to a space. They'll want perhaps not to be in big crowded environments like the big cavernous kind of WeWork type spaces.
Right.
But you can have the benefits in terms of community and still be quite separate, I've found.
Yeah. So I'd love to dive into your book because this seems like what people are talking about and needing at the moment. And your book is called Solo: How to Work Alone and Not Lose Your Mind. So this is on the top of everybody's mind right now. So first of all, I ask, why did you write this book? And we were talking before we started recording. You said that you actually started writing this book 7 years ago.
Yeah.
So it wasn't even part of the pandemic. So let's talk about, why did you write this book? And then we'll dive into the content of the book.
Yeah, so people often think it's a pandemic related book and say, gosh, you did write that quickly. How clever. And it's like, no, no, no. It's a bit of a longer process. So I had a really difficult time. I've been freelance for 12 and a half years or so now. And I had a really difficult time about 6 years in where I got completely overwhelmed. I basically burnout, really close to burnout, totally over obsessed with work, no space in my life for anything else, and wasn't seeing friends, wasn't seeing family, didn't really have much else going on. I was doing a TV show, again, a huge privilege, but it was a weekly TV show on a Sunday morning, so I was working weekends. It was live. I had to be up at 5 o'clock in the morning, no
Ooh.
holidays, 48 weeks a year, the show. And being a journalist 5 days a week, the rest of the time editing a couple of magazines for the Soho House Group, on paper, all very glossy and kind of lovely looking from the outside. Inside, really lonely, really miserable, and beginning to hate what I did. And so I went looking for a book because that's kind of how I manage difficult things. And I couldn't find one. I just couldn't find one. There's more stuff now out there, books and support organizations and networks, but at the time just didn't seem to be much at all. And weirdly, and this says a lot about me, I think, not all of it good, that kind of morphed into thinking I've got to write a book about this. Like I was finding bits of information in journal articles and, quite obscure texts, and feeling as though there was a lot of stuff out there, but it just wasn't all in one place. And I kind of decided that because my skill is journalism, that was what I had to kind of pull together. And here we are. And then I actually didn't get the book deal until 2019 because I was having babies, which aren't not great for book writing purposes. So my eldest was 5 when I started writing the book in 2019, which felt like a sort of sane time to approach it. And I finished writing it in lockdown. And actually, it wasn't even meant to be out now. It wasn't scheduled to come out until April this year. But we decided once it was written that actually it was probably a good idea to bring it forward, because suddenly we were in this completely different context, and it wasn't a book that was just going to be useful for the occasional remote worker and a few freelancers, which was very much how I'd seen it in my head.
Yeah, now the whole world needs it. Like all of a sudden overnight, the whole world was like, ah.
I know. It's so weird. So weird.
So how do we work alone without losing our mind? What are some of how would you advise people? Like, where do you start with something like this?
Yeah, I mean, it's big. That's why it's 90,000 words long. It's a big
Wow.
topic. Um, there are lots of things that you can do. I think one of the big things that the book as a whole tries to encourage people to do is just to have a conversation with yourself about who you are and what you need and want from your life, and what will suit you best. Because what I did was quite unthinkingly just adopt all of the things that I had learned about what work was and what an office looked like from my previous job when I'd been a journalist on staff at the Observer, which I'd done for 6 years. And so I just took on the kind of the same routine that I would have had there, the same kind of expectations of what my productivity levels would be. And I didn't really think about it much more than that. I got myself a white desk, put it in a white room, got a desk chair, really ugly one, really uncomfortable, ugly desk chair, and just kind of put my head down. And I didn't look up again for about 6 years. So that's the mistake that I'd really like to encourage people not to do. Is, I know it's hard at the moment because we're exhausted because of everything that we've been through, but the questions that I didn't ask myself were, what is it that I want from life? Why have I gone freelance? Why am I working by myself? Like, what are the advantages? What do I want to try and exploit from this situation? What are the things about working in an office that I didn't like that I want to change? And then also, what do I need in terms of social interaction? Like, how do I, there's a brilliant psychologist at Yale called Laurie Santos, and she always calls happiness like she says it's like a car tire that you have to inflate regularly. And if you don't inflate it, it gradually deflates. And I think I think that's very true. And I think that is how I look at work life, in that you have to figure out what are the things that pump up your work tire, not just the work that you do. In fact, that's almost the least important bit of it. But what's the stuff that scaffolds you, that sits around you? Like, are you getting enough access to daylight? Are you leaving your desk enough? Are you taking enough breaks? Are you being the worst boss of yourself you could possibly be? Are you saying, as the boss of your tiny company of one, and this is true even if you're a remote worker with an actual boss, when you work by yourself, you're the only one looking, unless you're working for a horrible organization which digitally monitors you, but essentially you're the only one looking. So are you being really mean in a way that you wouldn't accept from a real human? Are you, for example, saying to yourself, you may only have a lunch break, which is 4 minutes long and consists of you eating some dry cheese directly from the fridge while doom scrolling on Twitter? Then you must return to your desk and expect yourself to do work. Like, is that, if you wouldn't accept that if somebody in real life said that to you, but are you doing that to yourself? Or, are you shoving work into a tiny corner of your home and not giving it the kind of primacy that it deserves in the moments where it should have primacy? Are you somebody who needs transitional rituals? Do you need to do things which allow you to shift from the home mode in your brain to the work mode? And if you do, what are they? Like, for me, it's wearing eyeliner and being quite smartly dressed, like not crazy smartly dressed, but certainly not the kind of looking after small children or, doing the gardening type clothes that I also have. That's really important to me. It's really important that I kind of do things, not just because it's vanity, although I am quite vain, but it's also about saying to myself, I am in work mode, and this is what is happening now. Work is happening now. Other things don't have primacy. Work does, and then I'll shift out of that. So I know people who have a candle that they burn during work time and then they blow it out. I also quite often advise people, because I do quite a lot of talks to businesses to try and help their newly remote staff, if you don't have a door to shut on your work, say you're working in your bedroom, do something symbolic, like throw a sheet over the desk so that your work isn't looking back at you. Do whatever you need to make your brain kind of understand that work is done, as much as you needed to do at the beginning to say work has started. So I think those are some quite profound things that we can do. But fundamentally, it's about having a conversation with yourself and saying, who am I and what do I want my life to look like?
Yeah, and really having those startup and wind down rituals, that's also been something I've put in place for myself. And I actually bought this button and it's weird what works, right? It's like, but like, okay, if it works, it works. And I have one of those buttons that says that was easy. So you push it, it says that was easy. I actually hung it on my wall on my way out the door. So like the last thing that I do when I end the day was I hit the button that says that was easy. And even if it's been a hard day, for some reason, it's just like such a silly release of like, oh, that wasn't so bad. I'm going to go down to dinner now and
Yeah,
do something.
yeah. It's startlingly effective. People drink coffee out of one specific mug, which is just their work mug, as it would be if you had a mug in an office. For me, I know that if I listen to a particular radio show, then I've gone too far into the morning and I'm late for work. Like if Woman's Hour starts at 10 a.m., then I know I've overdone it. And I should be at work. Like I have 2 cups of coffee. There's all, and sometimes it's not even about instituting rituals. It's about recognizing the ones that you already have and paying attention to them. Like I didn't change anything. I just made a note of what my transitions looked like.
Mhm. And we have you wrote here in the email that you're saying that COVID-19 work from home isn't real work from home. So I want to dive into that because I think it's a good reminder for all of us out there that this is not normal, that this is forced and it changes things.
Yeah. Yeah, it really isn't the same thing. I mean, it's so different. It's so profoundly different. And I think it's really important if you're working for an organization where you are fearful that you're going to be in a work from home situation in the very, very long term, and you don't like the sound of that because you haven't enjoyed this last year, I just would like to reassure people that like nobody's enjoyed the last year. Even people like me who are quite skilled at working from home have not enjoyed the last year because all of the pressure release valves that we have normally have been taken away. So all of the things which make working from home joyful, like the capacity to work in a coffee shop or to finish 2 hours early or to work in the garden or have a walk whenever you feel like it or live on the edge of the city rather than living in the center, all of those things, though they don't have the same power at the moment. They don't have the same benefits, and we can't go out in the evenings to have dinner with our friends and do all of the things which make work tolerable. So I mean, working in an office isn't particularly tolerable at the moment for the people that are doing it because they don't have the pressure release valves either. So I think that's fundamentally what it's about. If you can imagine what working from home would look like in a year, say, or less, hopefully once restrictions are gone, then and do a little thought experiment about what that might feel like. I think most people would think, yeah, okay, that is far more tolerable. There aren't children in the house. I will be
Right.
able to travel at the weekends. I will be able to see my friends. I won't be existing in this kind of low level state of permanent anxiety. I won't be exhausted by that feeling. All of that stuff will kind of come together. And also you'll have choice about where to work, like me in having another space. We will have choices which we just don't have now because
Right.
other spaces will open up to us.
Right. In some ways, it's easy because it's like, are you allowed to? And the answer is no.
Yes.
So just like it's really easy, actually.
Yeah. Can I ... No, you can't.
Right. Yeah. Well, so I love this. So one of the things I actually want to ask you about, because you are a highly regarded food writer, having written 8 different best-selling cookbooks. So I would like to ask about food and remote working and actually sort of the ritual of it, but also the kinds of food maybe. I'm not a food person. I mean, I love food. I love food, but I'm not like a real food person. So I'd like to dive into this a little bit and get the expert's perspective on like, what should we be thinking about when working from home with relation to food?
I mean, one of the big things for me, and I'm really evangelical about this, is taking a break, right? And taking a break to eat something really good is, for me, like the perfect the perfect break. But more than that, there's loads of data about how taking a pause during your working day and after and between your working days really positively impacts the work that you're trying to do during your working time. So we've got this completely upside down notion, particularly in the kind of Western Europe and the US, where we think that just working longer and harder will result in better work. like that our productivity will be higher, and that's just rubbish. Like there's so much there's so much research which proves that that isn't the case, that actually we get more done when our work periods are bookended with rest, and the rest periods often need to include something which disengages your brain from the work that's gone before or is to come. And for me, cooking is the perfect way to do that, because it's slightly meditative, it's quite absorbing. You can sort of do other things at the same time, like listen to the radio or whatever, but it's fundamentally something which takes your brain away from work. And that's the moment when, again, studies have shown that we start to unravel complex problems, that we start to have creative moments, that our subconscious gets an opportunity to do its job, really. And bonus, you get a really nice meal out of the end of it.
Right.
So what's not to like? And I really strongly feel that we have to shift our thinking about this. Like, just because you're on your own and working from home doesn't mean you don't specifically deserve a good meal. So when I started doing the research for the book, I went on a few Facebook groups for solo workers to ask about what kind of topics they'd like me to cover in case I'd missed anything. And this thing about food kept coming up. Like, how do I not eat everything in the house? How do I not eat cereal for lunch? How do I not live on toast? And I was really like, oh, I didn't realize this was an issue, because I'm a food writer. So there's a lot of food in my life.
Right, you're not going to eat cereal for lunch, right?
Yeah, that is, I can 100% say I've never had cereal for lunch. So I started digging into it, and I realized that actually, yeah, it's a huge problem that a lot of people who work by themselves or for themselves, whether they work at home or near home, or in a warehouse, or a workshop or a studio, or in their van or wherever, they are tending to not sort of put much thought or energy into their lunch breaks. And that just made me really sad. And so I ended up writing a chapter about it in the book, which I wasn't expecting to do, because I thought people would think it was a cheat if a food writer wrote a chapter about food. I don't know why, but anyway, so I did go ahead and write it. And subsequently, I've been putting things on my Instagram account, which is @BexSeal, little 15-minute lunches. So I try and come up with recipes for one person, which are almost as quick as making a sandwich. So quite often it's things like I make a broth with like a spoonful of miso paste straight into the pan, noodles into the pan, and then a kind of selection of whatever vegetables happen to be lingering in the fridge. So, snap peas, or ribbons of carrot, or bits of courgette, or mushrooms, or whatever, and they all simmer away. And then I probably poach an egg in the broth as well. And then I just pour a load of soy sauce and sriracha over it in a bowl, and that takes like no time at all, but it's going to give me 2 or 3 portions of veg, an egg for protein. I don't tend to eat meat in the week. My husband and I have a thing where we try and only eat meat at the weekends, but it's filling, it's got lots of fiber, it's good for your gut health. The gut health is another big thing of mine. I think it's really important for our brain health that our guts are healthy and have a really good range of good bacteria. So if we're feeding them things like mushrooms and almost raw vegetables, then we're going to be doing ourselves good in that sense as well. So it's like the whole thing just has all these positives
Right.
that is sort of way outweighed by the thing that we carry around with us, which is this I should be working guilt. And actually, if we can just shift our brains to thinking this break is going to make me do my work better and quicker and be more able to finish when I should finish, leave it behind and get on with the more important rest of my life.
Yeah, I think the beyond food, the idea of taking enough breaks cannot be overstated.
Yeah.
And I've done this. My husband actually also suffered from burnout, and so one of the things that we did was at the end of the workday, that was it. Like the door is closed, no more work, no checking emails at 8 o'clock. And what I found was having that break in between starting the workday actually, and one, it compressed the amount of work that I had to do during the day. And so I was much more focused during the day, but I was able to be much more focused because I'd had that time off in between. And it was sort of, I've been working from home, like, I don't know, almost 20 years. So, it was just sort of this revelation of, oh, wow, like this break really did help me focus better.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah,
And
it
indeed,
recharges you sorry.
Yeah. No, please.
Well, it just recharges you in a really profound way that I think that we've really lost touch with the experience of, because it's so rare and because work has bled into our lives through our smartphones so completely that we have kind of forgotten that you wouldn't have worked like this before. We would generally have clocked off. And we've also got this really awful thing of deifying people who work insane hours. So, the people that say that they do, and I would emphasize say that they do, like 100 hours a week, the Elon Musks and the Jeff Bezoses of this world are outliers. Like, if they can work that long and be productive, that they're like machines. They're like cyborgs as far as I'm concerned, because it's not true for anybody else. And I would like to see a timesheet of their weeks and see whether they actually really are properly on for that long, because most of the science says that you can only really do focused, proper, productive work for 4 hours, for 4 hours a day, which is radically less than 100 hours a week. So I don't hold with that stuff, but we've created a kind of cultural expectation that hard work in and of itself is rewardable, and I just think we have to get away from it, because it's creating an epidemic of burnout, and the stats are really worrying. And we, the one chance we have when we work on our own, it's not the only chance, but one of the chances we have when we work on our own is to escape all of that, to free ourselves from that. And it's really hard because it's ingrained, it's societal, but it is an opportunity.
How do you suggest that people put boundaries, and like, how do you keep the boundaries you set for yourself? It sounds really simple, like, oh, just do it. But I don't know, anybody that's tried losing weight knows that it's so much more than just eat less and move more, right?
Yes.
You can say that it's so much more. So how do we consciously go about putting breaks and keeping the boundaries for ourselves? What tricks have you seen other people use, or do you use for yourself?
I mean, the tricks that work for me are rules. And it's funny that I should be talking about this today, because I had an argument with my husband about setting yet more rules last night. I was like, I don't want any more rules, like a really rebellious child. But we have a rule, for example, and it is useful, I will say, to have someone else who kind of creates accountability for this. But we have a rule where you don't talk about work before breakfast, and you don't talk about work after 8:30. You don't talk about work at the weekend. You can break that once a week for an evening, and once a month for a weekend day if you really have to work, but you have to say that you're doing it. And, there has to be a decent reason, not that you just chaotically didn't do any work during the week. And that's really useful, because, again, as you say, it forces you to compress the work into the existing time rather than letting it bleed everywhere. I found it much harder when we didn't have these rules, because I would just work way into the evening and just kind of pay no attention to my body or my brain saying I've had enough, or I'm not capable of doing any more. So I think that's important. The other thing that's quite an interesting trick is kind of making a distinction between your kind of past self, present self, and future self. So if you can kind of make a decision that has to be followed through further down the line, and they have to be precise decisions. That's why your whole eat less, exercise more thing doesn't really work. It has to be, on Tuesdays I start work at 9 or at 3 p.m. Like, I'm not obsessed with the 9 to 5, whatever you want to set your rhythm to be. But one of the people I interviewed in the book, a brilliant coach, calls it doing your ideal week. So you would write down, like, put it on a piece of paper, your plan for what you'd like your ideal week to look like. And so you're making those decisions in a moment where you don't have to follow through on them, because that's not what you're doing. You're just planning what this week would look like. And she encourages you to factor in, like, time for exercise, time for shopping, time for housework, all of that stuff. Like, be realistic about what the things are that need to fit into your week. And then when it comes to the point of actually having to kind of follow through, the hardest bit of the decision was done by your past self, and the only bit of willpower you have to find in the present moment is just the follow through willpower, which is a lot easier to find than having an argument with yourself about whether you will or won't start work at all. It's a different thing. And so when you project this kind of, and also the other thing that the research has shown is that we're very optimistic about what our future selves will do. So we're quite good at pushing things, like, positively down the line, and making good choices for ourselves. It's a bit like, you won't if you've made a promise to go to the gym with a friend, you're more likely to follow through because you're accountable to someone. You're sort of accountable to yourself in a way when you do this. You kind of create, your brain kind of creates different versions of yourself that you have kind of responsibilities to. So it's an interesting little trick that you can play. So I find that really useful. It's just having a framework of work starts at X time, it ends at X time. I always have a lunch break. Lunch breaks are always at least 45 minutes, ideally an hour. If you can just regiment that stuff. And actually, one of the other interviews, Alex Sujung Kim Pang, who's a brilliant guy and wrote an amazing book called Rest, he suggests, actually he told me this in my podcast, that you should actually sort of to-do list your rests and breaks, because otherwise they just don't get done, right? We're very good at to-do listing everything that we should be doing in terms of work, but we never put in like go for a run or get a haircut or whatever. And actually, if you do, then you are much more likely to actually do them, because you've created the priority instead of just this vague sense of I should generally run more.
Right.
Sometimes it's
Right.
there right in front of you. It's something that you can tick off, and that's really powerful. And this stuff is like simultaneously really difficult and really simple. We're not that complicated. But we do need to know how to trick ourselves.
Totally. And doing it is really, or, executing on it is really where it's difficult. And I love the idea of creating a framework for ourselves. And one thing that I found that's worked for me is I personally am not a morning person, and I just have a hard time getting started. Just every morning, it's the same struggle. So what I did is I made a checklist for myself of the things that I need to do. Like, okay, first I open my calendar, then I open the email, and then I do just a brief check. And then anyway, so I've got this like checklist for myself. And so in the morning, I don't have to think about it. I just open the checklist and I start with number 1, open the calendar, number 2. And then all of a sudden, 8 hours later, you're done with the day. It's like flow just sort of happens in there.
There's it is amazing. There's a brilliant article in the New York Times that headed something like "The Life-Changing Magic of Just Getting Started." And he cites a writer. It's by I'm going to forget his name anyway. But he cites a writer who talks about the kind of the law of not perpetual motion, but the law of motion. Like once in motion, a thing has a tendency to remain in motion, and spins it around to work. Like once working, a thing has a tendency to remain working. So it's like once you're just over that hump. The other thing that I've done, which was really useful, this was a few years ago now, was I did a thing that Laura Vanderkam, the time management business writer, suggests, which is that you do a spreadsheet for your whole week and you track what you're doing in the week. So every 30 minutes I would fill in a thing saying, I'm working, or I'm emailing, or I'm messing about, or I'm on Facebook, or I'm picking up the kids, or whatever. And I got this brilliant overview of like how much sleep I was getting, more than I thought actually, and how much work I was doing, less than I thought, because I thought I was doing like 60 hours a week, and I wasn't. I was doing 35, which is normal. And then I also imported a technique from Cal Newport, the productivity writer. Actually, he probably hates to be called that. Anyway, the writer, he's not a fan of productivity. And I marked in each half-hour period how sort of productive and engaged I was with whatever I was doing. And I realized that I'm just rubbish in the mornings, like right up till lunchtime. I'm not creative at all. So I try really hard to arrange my days now where the writing part, which is obviously a big part of my job as a writer, the writing parts are in the afternoon. Ideally, I would write until like 8 p.m. and then go to bed really late and get up quite late. Like I'm a night owl. That's my rhythm. I can't do that because it doesn't fit with the world, or indeed with small children. But it means that I don't hate myself. Like if I have to write something in the morning, it will be hard, and I am accepting of that. It will be more of a struggle. I'm not an idiot. I haven't forgotten how to write. I'm not going to fail. It will happen. It's just going to be a bit tougher. And that was a huge bit of realization for me, which I guess goes back to what I was saying at the beginning, that we just have to get to know ourselves and our rhythms. Like I've understood that it's hard to get started. I've understood that I'm not creative in the morning. So that's when I do my invoicing. It's simple stuff. But if you don't look up from the work for years and years and years, you never give yourself a chance to have those conversations and to figure out what the tricks might be for you.
Indeed. And I think what makes it difficult is everybody's trick is different.
Yeah.
So it's like there's no silver bullet formula that we can put out into the world and say, just do this, it'll be fine. It's like, what works for me is not going to work for you and vice versa. And I think that's what makes it so difficult.
Yeah,
Is
yeah. Well, and also, as we were saying again before we started recording, it's a constant work in progress. Like you're never done with this stuff, which is sort of simultaneously frustrating, but also I find it quite kind of energizing and exciting. You know, we're never going to be finished in terms of like creating our perfect work environment or persona. Things change, life changes, pandemics happen. um, all sorts of stuff comes along which throws off the routines and the practices that you've created. But I find that quite fascinating, like to have a kind of continual, is this working, is this not, does this suit me, does it not, conversations. It's quite energizing in a way. It's certainly not boring.
yeah, we can look at it that way. Life is never boring in that way.
I mean, I could do, pandemics are not boring, but I could do without them. I'm not saying everything everything weird is a good thing, but
Yeah,
yeah.
amen. I could do without the pandemic as well. So we're reaching the end of our time. I have tons of questions still. So I just want to ask two more questions, if that's
Sure.
all right with
Of
you.
course.
How do we know when we're burning out?
Brilliant. Yeah, very brilliant question. Very important question. So the World Health Organization designated burnout, work-related burnout, as a genuine condition, I think 2017. So it's a very real thing. The best ways, I mean, and since your husband suffered burnout, I'm sure you will be familiar with this as well. The best ways of thinking about it are, you know, do we feel perpetually tired and exhausted? Are we beginning to really resent the work that we are supposed to be doing? Like, not just, I'm not really enjoying my job, but like, I really hate, I really don't like what I'm doing and I'm angry about it. Like, do you feel a kind of increased level of disconnection from the people around you? And also this sense of kind of growing a fear of incompetence, or a kind of, not just the usual imposter syndrome that many of us, including me, have as a kind of day-to-day low-level companion, but that sense that, you know, you're on the precipice of something massively going wrong, or that you're really not competent to be where you are doing whatever you do, and often it's little things which kind of flag this. Like, Anne Helen Peterson wrote a brilliant book about burnout called Can't Even, and she suffered burnout, and in it she talks about her errand paralysis, she calls it, where she just couldn't do the small semi-important things in her life. She couldn't go and get her boots rehealed. She couldn't go to the post office and mail a load of stuff out that she was meant to be doing and had sat by the front door for months. She just became kind of unable to do more than the bare minimum that was related to the work that she was doing. And I think that is a sensation which a lot of people will be beginning to be familiar with at the moment. And also the other part of it is that the normal kind of rest and relaxation things, holidays and so on, don't really do the trick anymore. Like, they're not quite enough, you know, where once you could have a 2-week holiday and come back feeling refreshed, you might do that and feel that you're still completely overburdened by work. So it's quite an all-encompassing feeling, and it's really important, if that is what you're beginning to feel, it's really important that you kind of address it and start to think about whether work has unfairly taken over parts of your life, and whether you're giving yourself enough time day to day to look after yourself. Quite a lot of people report not being able to read fiction or not being able to read much at all in their leisure time. That's quite often a bit of a flag, which was a very common experience towards the beginning of the pandemic. Over the first few months, a lot of people were reporting that they were finding it really difficult to concentrate on reading fiction, and that they had lost their escapism. So
Oh,
I think,
wow.
yeah.
I can imagine. I mean, the pandemic was really, really scary in the beginning. We had no idea what we were dealing with. And yeah, and everybody, yeah, it was just really scary. I like those. Those are really, really good symptoms. So feeling tired, the resentment and the anger. I actually I could totally relate to that. I remember in December, I had just done a whole bunch of talks and workshops. And right before the break started, I was getting clients contacting me for stuff, you know, this year. And I was like angry that they were contacting me. And it was so weird because I thought, wait, that's like what I do. That's, you know, I have all kinds of lead generations to get people to contact me. And all of a sudden, you know, like I'm having an anger response. And it was really a cue, like, now it's time to take a break. Like
Yeah.
really a long, long break. Like get off
Yeah.
the computer, walk away, take a break.
Yeah.
Yeah, for like weeks. So
Yeah. Yeah,
yeah,
often it has to be big. It has to be quite a dramatic thing. I mean, if you're lucky and you catch it early, then just making changes to the way that your day is set up and your week is set up can be enough. But if you've gone a bit far into it, then sometimes you do need a proper chunk of time where you just recuperate, because it's like being ill. It's the
yeah,
same thing.
absolutely. Absolutely. And I've seen people with severe burnout and it's taken years to recover for some people.
Yeah.
So indeed, it's not to be taken lightly, and do not power through,
No,
listeners, do not power through the burnout.
there's
Get
no such
help.
thing. You won't. Your body will stop you at the end anyway. You won't,
Yeah,
you cannot power through. At some point you will face a moment where you can't carry on.
indeed.
It's
And when
better
your
if you
body
choose,
force quits, yeah.
right? Yeah.
Yeah, you don't want your body to choose for you. It will be very inconvenient. I can.
Yes. Yes.
It's never a good time.
Yeah. However inconvenient you think it is now, it will be more inconvenient at a later date. Yeah, for sure.
Right, love it. So last question, which is an easy one, which is, if people want to learn more about you, what's the best place to find you on the internet?
So the website for the book is howtoworkalone.com, and you can find lots of things out about it and me, and there are resources and links to articles and things like that there too. If you want to follow me on Instagram, it's at Bex Seal, which is BEXSEAL, or I'm on Twitter at Rebecca Seal. I'm not hard to find.
Great. I'll put it in the show notes to make it even easier for the listeners
Thank
to find
you.
the information. Thank you so much for your time today. I took copious notes
Oh,
and I
amazing.
look forward to putting them all in the show notes there. So thank you so much, Rebecca.
Such a pleasure. Thank you very much for having me.
Until next time, everybody, be powerful and take breaks.